While these shows are normally about analyzing football, sometimes analyzing what happens off the field, but still pertaining to football, and sometimes we get really analytical about the game, sometimes we have to talk about some drama outside the football world. Always like to have a little fun here on this episode, of course, of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now, and really across our Now Network family of sites. But this one is going to take a little bit more of a serious turn because the news today, certainly around the Pittsburgh Steelers, was a bit more serious, certainly for something that's happening off the field with a beloved member of the Steelers community, Tunch Ilkin, announcing through his church, actually, and it's certainly now been well covered, that he has been diagnosed with ALS, a former Pittsburgh Steeler offensive lineman, and of course, a broadcaster that many fans right now are, I'm sure, familiar with. So I wanted to bring on somebody that I think is the best possible person to discuss this. And actually, I saw him share our initial coverage. So I wanted to message him and see if he'd be gracious enough to join me. He is gracious enough to join me. So that one thing I'm thankful for, because, of course, I am not a doctor and I can't play one here as a member of media. So I wanted to get somebody on that can really speak on what Tunch is looking at, what Mr. Ilkin is looking at, and really how things are now in comparison to when he played, and maybe if they are the same or if they are different. So he is the CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. He also is the co-founder of BU CTE Center. He is, as I said, he is a doctor. He is a neuroscientist. He is an author, and actually, he is a former WWE superstar as well. He is Christopher Nowinski. So, Chris, first off, I definitely appreciate you joining me here. I know it was short notice for the both of us, but this news has been the news of the day, really beyond the Steelers, but in the sports world. And it's an important subject, I feel, to touch on, even though it kind of goes more a little different than what I normally focus on here for these shows and across our network. So first off, of course, Tunch Ilkin announcing that he's been diagnosed with ALS. I do want to get your just initial thoughts as we start things. What was your initial thoughts? I saw what you put out there on Twitter, but this is a former professional athlete like yourself announcing this diagnosis, and I'm sure you know now what he's going to be undertaking and the difficulty there. So what initially did you think when you heard this news?
Well, my first thought was sympathy for Tunch and his family. I mean, the reality is ALS is a terrible disease, and more people know about that now through the Ice Bucket Challenge 5 years ago. Right. It's a neurodegenerative disease. It basically primarily shuts down motor function, meaning that over time he's going to lose his ability to walk, to use his arms, eventually to speak, and eventually to breathe. And most people after diagnosis live 2 to 5 years. So it's not a very long time. And what I posted was, and why this is of specific interest to me, is that NFL players have been diagnosed with ALS at about 4 times the rate of the population. And until we started this research on CT a decade ago, people didn't know why. They thought when there were 3 49ers diagnosed, well, probably 40 years ago, off the same team, people thought it was something, it was a pesticide in the grass, was it exercise, was it, and for some reason, brain trauma has been ignored as the linking cause of why NFL players have a greater risk, and professional soccer players in Scotland and Italy have been diagnosed. Yeah, so, you know, we just know that we're going to have NFL players diagnosed every year, and it's just really sad to see who's next.
Obviously, it definitely is sad. And when you threw out that number there of NFL players who played 5 or more seasons being 4 times greater, that really is a jaw-dropping number. And of course, the average lifespan for most NFL players is less than 5 years, around 3.5, maybe 4.5. But that's still a lot of NFL players that are going to get hit around that number. And I'm sure they still even have a likelihood maybe less than 4 times greater if they do get to 3.5, 4 years as well. So that's just a lot of people in the population that certainly have that as a risk for them. And then knowing the disease, I mean, is this something that the fans are going to notice quickly, are going to notice gradually? I mean, you mentioned that 2 to 4 year situation of maybe even losing the ability to walk here. And he currently is an active broadcaster. He currently is covering the Steelers actively. He hasn't played for decades, and we'll get to the differences of when he played to now in a moment. But is this something that his career is going to be ending soon? We're not going to be seeing him as soon. Would you expect that announcement? What do you think fans are going to be seeing here? Is there going to be something maybe jarring the next time they would see him on TV?
You never want to predict one individual situation, not knowing the specific history and all that. I wish him the best. And the reality is, people progress at different rates. So he can probably still work. And I hope he can work as long as he possibly can work. Right. But, I think what's important about the framing of this too, and why it's interesting to me from a public health side, not just the NFL side, is that, our research team has gotten the brains of a lot of those NFL players with ALS. And the reality is every single one has had CTE. And there's now research linking that the neurodegeneration that's causing CTE might also be, or some process is shared in causing ALS. Right. And so it's the trauma that's causing it. And then you mentioned the study, that specific study was 5 years and above. What we're learning about CT, and I would say is almost certainly true about ALS, is it's a dose-response relationship. So it's not just NFL players. The question is, how many years of football did you play? Okay. And I talked to a college football, after my post, I actually was reached out to by a college football player, not much older than me, that was diagnosed 2 years ago. And we had a conversation. And we don't have the same data on college football because it's not as easy to get. But the reality is your CTE risk goes up 30% per year you play. It's very much like your risk of lung cancer when you smoke. It goes up about 30% per year you smoke. And so it's probably the same for ALS. And so this is a problem for all of football and all of contact sports, soccer as well. And we're going to find rugby too. And so it's also important for people to understand that if it's 4 times greater risk for NFL players, 3 out of those 4 got it because they played football. And if we don't start changing the game, we're going to just keep having this happen forever. And we'll all get very sad, but we're not going to stem the tide.
Right. And again here, for those who don't know, again, Chris Nowinski here joining me here on this episode of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. And you have a history of playing collegiate football at Harvard and, of course, being a professional wrestler in the WWE, which, again, for those who don't know, that's going to be a lot of head trauma as well. And that's been well documented with issues of CTE and different issues there in terms of wrestlers unfortunately passing away early and then seeing signs of CTE in their brains after they would pass away. But again, with Tunch Ilkin's situation here, I do want to connect the dots because he's somebody whose career in terms of playing career, and you mentioned that it's more about years of playing than just 5+ years in the National Football League. So that's even longer time that he would have been dealing with this, and who knows maybe how long this head trauma or what CTE he may have or how long this maybe has developed in him. But his playing days are long gone. So is it common for somebody long after their playing career, and I've been around him, not only is he one of the nicest guys in the world, but he's certainly been able to do the job. So this does come at a bit of a surprise. Is it something that could just develop seemingly out of nowhere? Is this a gradual process? Is it something that maybe is more common in terms of somebody who's closer to connected of playing, because he's been so disconnected of playing, that might come as a bit of a surprise to see this diagnosis connecting to his playing days decades after he has last played?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, we need to do more research, but our understanding today is, and there will eventually be papers on this, is that NFL players are getting this younger on average than other regular people. And in the brains we've looked at, there is a subset who are getting it as they're getting dementia. And so a lot of people, basically develop dementia and then get ALS in the last few years of their life in their 60s, 70s. And then there's also a group that are the ones who are getting it in their 30s and 40s. And this is the Eric Stevens recently. This is the Steve Smith, O.J. Bergrants, Kevin Turner. And that's very rare to get it that young. Tim Shaw very recently. So that might be the more directly football caused, because it is much more, you're much less likely to get it that young. But it's one of those things that ALS is also a sort of bucket term for, we don't know why 90% of those things happen. So there might be 20 ways to get to ALS, and we just don't know which one they are and how that will affect the course of their disease.
Yeah, and Tunch Ilkin, 63 years old. He's last played professional football in 1993, but it was well more than 5 years of playing football, a 13-year career, and certainly playing prior to that. And again, here speaking with Chris Nowinski, Mike Asti here, he played mostly in the 1980s, a little bit in the early 90s as well. So he is well removed from the current age of football. And while there's tons of differences, as I'm sure you know, as a sports fan, there's tons of differences from the way the game is played and different rules, of course. Speak on if there is a safer element to the game right now and how things maybe could be different, because I could also see that maybe being a surprise element for some fans out there that we've been hearing. Well, not only is he decades away from playing, but the game is advertised as being safer. We've seen movies. We certainly know a lot more. People like yourself are doing research, making this a career, or making this an endeavor. Of course, there again, the Concussion Legacy Foundation, the BU CTE Center, all of those things that you're doing to raise awareness for what's happened. And you've been at this for a decade or so, I believe. But he's been long out of playing. And the advertisement and the thinking is that it is a safer game in the National Football League, while still understanding this is a violent game, and you do sign up for that.
Sure.
How is the NFL different now to when he played in terms of safety? Is it different? Is it safer now? And how much of a misconception do you believe is out there right now in terms of safety?
Yeah, it's certainly, yeah, it's advertised as much safer than it is. I would say that it's not, we can't say football is safer because we don't know that. Football is more ethical than it was in his era, in the sense that if you get a concussion, you're getting real medical care now. You're not being given smelling salts and told to go back in.
Right.
You can't use your head as a weapon as much now, although it's still happening all the time.
Right.
The egregious hits are gone. So it's, it's cleaner. It's more sanitized. It's less bloody, But if you just think about the energy going into someone's brain over and over again, football may be more dangerous now than ever before. And the reason is people start younger now than they ever have before. And so they have more years. In his era, guys, the average age might have been 12 when you started. Then it moved down to single digits. And then you also have bigger, stronger, faster, which nobody's built into the models. And we need to, because we're talking about, what did he play at? 250? As a lineman, like, who knows? People are 20% larger now and faster and stronger and able to strike with energy better than ever before. So the reality is, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I would definitely say that the athletes are stronger, faster, I'm sure the ones you've been around, than in the past. So that can certainly compound things, that if they are doing measures to make the game safer, well, there might be something going against that in terms of the athleticism of some of these athletes right now. And of course, Steeler fans are well familiar with the drama with Vontaze Burfict and many other opponents of theirs just even a year or so ago, and that being off of nasty hits and maybe even some thoughts of that is how we got to where we are with Antonio Brown's career. There have been some who brought up that maybe there's CTE there in terms of that just unraveling. So that is a misconception that I feel is out there. I'm glad that you addressed that in terms of the differences of the game today to the past. Tunch Ilkin, obviously, he admits his diagnosis with ALS. He announces that diagnosis, and obviously it's a sad story just to hear that from anybody, but certainly somebody that I've been around and know is just such a nice guy in general. Have you been able to speak to any athletes today in terms of, are you hearing them speak differently than maybe players of the past like Tunch? I do want to kind of end it this way because you touched on how players back when he was playing would have been told smelling salts, get back in there. He might have had that mentality knowing that he stayed in the league for 13 years, which means he probably had to have the mentality, I got to get on this field. So you're doing you're doing whatever you can to get on the field. You don't want to sit out plays. You don't want to sit out games. And Tunch wasn't a Hall of Famer. He was somebody that was fighting for his spot, which might compounded it even more. But when you speak to athletes today, do you feel there's a better sense of awareness because of people like yourself, a former professional athlete, former football player, professional wrestler, that's raising this awareness? And we've noticed with athletes, you mentioned those on the Niners, we've seen players, certainly NFL players in particular, retire. announce their retirement even before getting big money deals in their 20s and citing CTE as a reason why they're just done playing and they go into some other venue. Andrew Luck, somebody that around my age, around early 30s, late 20s, deciding to pack it in the midst of what could have been a Hall of Fame career that many believe, due to his announcement so early, may stop him from ever getting into the Hall of Fame. Are you feeling like those things compounding with your research, maybe it's having an impact? Are you seeing that impact in terms of players now being more aware? Because we have seen certainly players retire earlier than ever before, just choosing to step away.
I think it's only been a handful of players, though, and very few of them really want to talk about CTE. If you think about, the thousands of players each year who are in the NFL, I would say there's been really great leadership from the NFL players who are involved with the NFL Players Association. So I'm an advisor there, and they took our advice over 10 years ago to stop hitting in practice, and they baked that into the CBA, and that's lowered their exposure, and they've been advocates for themselves on safety. So that's great. But your average player, I always find it shocking how few reach out to us to learn anything about this research, to get involved. I was excited. I've talked to 2 active NFL players this season, and that's like a record, and they're asking a few questions, but most of them, the Chris Borland example of calling us, getting to know the work and going, I'm out, is the Chris Borland example, right?
That's why it's named after somebody.
Even though the research has gotten dramatically worse, we've proven that at least 10% of NFL players have CT, and it might be at least 2 or 3 times that as we're getting a higher volume of brains. Most people, while they have a chance to finally make money in football, don't want to be thinking about the long-term things because they had to bang their head for 10 years to get there. Might as well make a few $1 million, I think, is what a lot of them are thinking. And so it's a bad situation. They made that choice to play as a child before they had informed consent. And it's very hard to walk away from the money and the glory while you're in the spotlight.
What do you say, though, to the devil's advocate stance of, well, they're making the NFL, they're making football these days too much of a quote-unquote wimpy game. They're protecting them too much. They're protecting the quarterbacks in particular too much. It's impossible for defenses. We throw up clips all the time at practice, and there's always somebody who's going to comment and saying, why aren't they hitting? Nobody's hit each other in this clip. And as you said, that's not happening anymore, but there are still people that almost are turned off by the violence being turned down a little bit. Any comments to those?
Yeah, that's why that's my dad would say, that's why there's chocolate and vanilla ice cream. I mean, until you've been on the field to know how brutal it is, it's probably not ex-players saying that.
No, this is fans.
And your fans can be fans. You can complain. It's not your choice how hard they play. If you want to make your comments, I guess that's fine. But trust me in that safer is better. If you want to still enjoy them and have them tell their stories when they're older and remember their stories, we got to take it back.
Yeah, and I'm sure Tunch would express that as well. And the story of a great guy and a great player having to have his later years be living with ALS, not ideal situation. I'm sure he and everybody else wants to avoid that. Chris Nowinski, again, I really do appreciate the time. I just want to ask you this here to get us out. We talked about the misconceptions and how things maybe aren't as safe as maybe they should be or people think they are now in comparison to earlier in the NFL in particular. What do you feel needs done? This might be a loaded question, but any thoughts on what needs done to progress that even further to meet the expectations that people may think we are at?
The next 2 things need to happen to make football players less likely to develop these neurodegenerative diseases. No tackle football for children. Okay, we know what this does to grown men. Don't have them start early. We now have the evidence to say if you start them young, their risk of degenerative disease goes up, but the benefits are almost nothing. You're not a better football player because you start tackle at 5. Play flag or play something else. So if you're a parent out there, please listen. Go to the concussionfoundation.org website or go to tacklecanwait.com. and you'll learn about how to protect your kids. So please don't play till high school. I didn't play till high school. I thank my mother every day. And then the rest of it, like high school and college, keep making it safer, keep tweaking the rules. We got to take hitting out of practice. College football, NFL, they never have concussions in practice anymore. College football, we're still talking 2/3 of the concussions are in practice. So that means they're just beating the hell out of these guys for no reason other than I can't think of another way to practice. Coaches don't want to be retrained on how to teach the game. Teach the game without hitting your guys in the head, save their lives.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the age of college players today, not even being born in many cases to when Tunch last played. It really is then about the coaches. They're teaching them to go at it a certain way, so that certainly can change. Well, this is a serious topic, so I won't get us out of here bringing up the WWE career at all, but I certainly was a fan of that as well. So, Chris, I definitely appreciate the time. You can go back to your lovely family there, and I certainly, I'm sure, can extend your well wishes to Tunch. For the fight that he is in, but he is a fighter, and he certainly has announced that he is looking to fight, and certainly hopes to be able to be a champion of ALS like he was throughout his professional career to this point. So again, Chris Nowinski, who is the CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, co-founder of BU CTE Center. He's a neuroscientist, so I'm not a doctor. I can't play one in media. He can. And also an author and a former WWE superstar and a collegiate player at Harvard. So, Chris, again, I absolutely appreciate the time.
Mike, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks. Appreciate covering this.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.